Israel is giving the talks for a hostage release deal another chance. The war cabinet has voted to send a delegation to Paris for negotiations.
Israeli military forces are increasing their assault on Hamas and Gaza, just as new reports surface of the terror group's brutal sexual violence against women and girls. CBN's Paul Strand brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Israel's war against Hamas started months ago in the north of Gaza, but the military says it's still expanding its operations there. Troops were seen running and firing as they made their way building to building. And as the fighting continues, Israeli negotiators are headed back to stalled talks aimed at getting the release of up to 130 hostages that Hamas may still hold captive in Gaza. Israel's returning to talks because mediators say Hamas has softened its demands, like a total end to the war. Even so, Israel's goal is to keep going till it has permanently ended the threat of Hamas. Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz has repeated his demand that Hamas release all the hostages before the March 10th start of Ramadan. If they don't, he says the IDF will launch its offensive even during that Islamic holy month into its last major target. That's the city of Rafah, which right now is packed with more than 1 million Palestinian refugees who fled earlier fighting in other parts of Gaza. Meanwhile, more information on that new report to the United Nations showing horrific sexual violence committed by Hamas against Israeli women and girls October 7th. The head of the group issuing the report told CBN's Julie Stahl the brutal attacks included gang assaults and shooting women in their private parts.
It was systematic, planned, intentional sexual violence atrocities, very sadistic and very brutal. It's very hard to see that these kind of things happen and the world denies, doesn't care, doesn't believe.
And in areas where Israeli forces have eliminated the terrorist threats, some of the tens of thousands of Israelis who evacuated many dozens of communities close to Gaza after Hamas's deadly attack are preparing to return to their homes. Many were too terrified of another invasion or continued barrages of missiles from Gaza, but both threats appear nearly over. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was dealing with the same issue of getting Israeli evacuees back to their homes, but this time in northern Israel, near the border with Lebanon. Many fled the almost daily shelling and drone attacks launched by Hezbollah terrorists since October. Netanyahu was visiting troops on the Golan Heights and promised an end to the Hezbollah threat and safety for Israeli residents.
We will achieve it in one of two ways, by military means, if required, in a political way, if possible.
Meanwhile, he's presented his war cabinet a plan for Gaza after the war. It includes a complete demilitarization of Gaza, except for Israeli troops manning a buffer zone between Gaza and Israel. It calls for de-radicalizing Gaza's Palestinians. Polls show they, by a vast majority, support Hamas's goals of wiping out the nation of Israel and its entire Jewish population. The post-war plan also envisions a takeover by local Palestinians experienced in governing, but only if they're not connected to terrorist groups. Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks so much, Paul, and we certainly hope there is fruit from these negotiations and hostages are